394, and at the time of the Civil War is also called the Black Gap Road, was always had traffic during the battle. You know how the Union Army had three primary lines of communication: the Emmitsburg Road, Taneytown Road, Baltimore Pike. And their fishhook was sort of a tortoiseshell protection of those three roads that led back in the direction of Washington and Baltimore and Frederick. Well, in similar manner, the equivalent on the Union side, on the Confederate side, would have been Fairfield Road, Cashtown Road, and Black Gap Road. Those were the three tentacles that the Confederates crossed from the Cumberland Shenandoah Valley over the Blue Ridge Mountains here into the Susquehanna Valley to gather supplies. So their lines of operation here in South Central Pennsylvania depended on protecting those three roads at all times. So this is not a peripheral road, this is one of three roads: Fairfield Road, Cashtown Road, Black Gap Road, that the Confederates, their invasion depended on protecting those three roads. So you know, think of the Union Army not having the Baltimore Pike, or not having the Taneytown Road, or not having the Emmitsburg Road. If you remove the Black Gap Road, it'd be like removing 1/3 of the avenues of approach. So as a result, you find activity here all during the campaign. For instance, John Buford was here picketing this road on June 29th. Buford's cavalry was here picketing this road here. And the reason they were is Jubal Early's links, his communication links all the way out to York, where he was, you all know, he was burning railroad bridges and regular bridges and ripping out rail and threatening to burn other things. And he marched all the way out to York. While that was going on, this tentacle had to be protected. So Buford came up from along the Heidlersburg Road to threaten it, essentially to keep an eye on it. And sort of like coming up behind a dog and pulling his tail and he turns and bites. This would have been the tail for the Confederate Army all the way out in York. So you come up and pull the tail here. Maybe the Confederates come back just from threatening this. So this was on the 29th. Buford was out here. It's possible that the first shot of the battle was fired on the 29th out here between some of Buford's cavalry and some of Jenkins' Confederate cavalry. Paul Shevchuk, some of you know him. He used to be the assistant curator at the park. Bill, you worked with him many years ago. He wrote an article in 1990 or 91 to Gettysburg magazine arguing the first shot of the Gettysburg campaign was fired here in terms of the main battle in earnest. And just to kind of round things out, in case I forget to say, on July the 4th, during the Confederate retreat, some of Gregg's cavalry came out here on this road. And double check me on this, but I think it was the 16th Pennsylvania Cavalry. I feel pretty certain it was them. I just haven't looked at it in a long time, but it was some of David Gregg's cavalry was out here, along with the 12th Corps, Ruger's Brigade in particular, 27th Indiana, 13th New Jersey, 2nd Mass, 3rd Wisconsin. They marched from Culp's Hill out to Benner's Hill to sweep that area to make sure that Johnson's Confederates were gone. And they had withdrawn back to west of town to Oak Ridge, and the retreat was folding in on the roads that I mentioned a little earlier, Cashtown Road, Fairfield Road. Well, the 11th Corps stepped off of Cemetery Hill, and they moved slightly north and west to what is now Howard Avenue and Colt Park Development. If you go into Colt Park Development, there's a rec park back there adjacent to it, and there's a street there called Howard Avenue. That's where Howard's division, Howard's Corps, 11th Corps advanced on July 4th, while the 12th Corps went up to secure Benner's Hill, while Gregg's cavalry came up to secure this road. It was basically the Union line unbending from a fishhook to like unbending a paperclip and making it straight. So everything that I mentioned from Howard Avenue to Benner's Hill to Hunterstown was the straightening out of the Union line. It made the Union Army prior to that movement on July 4th only controlled the Baltimore Pike and the Taneytown Road. The Confederates controlled 8 of the 10 roads. You try to imagine evacuating a stadium and there's 80,000 people. Which stadium would you choose to want to evacuate after it's over? The one with 2 exits or the one with 8 exits? So the Confederates had, with the fall of the Peach Orchard, the Confederates had 8 roads. So that one fell swoop movement of Howard north and west into what's now Howard Avenue, Cole Park Development, Ruger of 12th Corps going to Benner's Hill, and Gregg's Cavalry coming up here to Hunterstown, that straightened out the line and that reclaimed 3 roads. It basically cut in half General Lee's access. The only way Lee could go at that point was just to retreat across the Blue Ridge Mountains. He had no access again east of town. So this is really, really important. Also, something important to know is, you may know that in the late 1780s, there was talk of making Hunterstown the county seat and putting the courthouse here. But James Geddes and others pushed really hard to have it built originally in the town square. And then basically the courthouse then was moved, as you all know, a few years later. I think there was a fire that occurred. But the courthouse between Gettysburg and Hunterstown, you could flip a coin. It was a time when Hunterstown almost became the center of the county. That's really important. It's like, think about if you didn't have access to the internet in your house, you had no Wi-Fi or anything like that. Well, once you become where the courthouse is, you become sort of the center of gravity for the county, and then later on that sets the stage for the railroad to come through, which connects you with Philadelphia in one direction and Hancock, Maryland, and St. Louis in the other direction. It's sort of a snowball effect. When the courthouse didn't go here, this town became a backwater town, and Gettysburg came more and more central. So now here's another story I'll throw in real quick, and this is shaky. The evidence is not real strong, but apparently George Washington came through here in the early 1790s. It was part of the Whiskey Rebellion. You all know that he marched with the army out west to the area where Somerset is, not far from Flight 93. A lot of the people in western Pennsylvania were upset that there was an excise tax. It was a tax on their alcohol. What they were doing at the end of harvest season is they would take the grains and make them into alcohol, because you could bottle them and carry them easier to Baltimore to trade in the transatlantic trade at Chesapeake Bay. And so as a result of this excise tax, it took away the profit that they would make at the end of harvest. So there was a rebellion. It's long before the Civil War rebellion. There was a rebellion over a whiskey tax, and that occurred out in western PA. It was the first test of the American Army to put down any kind of a rebellion. George Washington led it. Robert E. Lee's father, Light Horse Harry Lee, was involved in it. And they marched through Carlisle, from Philly through Carlisle, out to Somerset. When word got that the regulars were marching out there, people began to disband and the rebellion broke up. And on the way back, Washington took a different route and he came through Hunterstown. And so there's a story, it's oral history, it's been passed down, but it was written down 50 years later that he stopped here at the Langman's house and may have gotten his horse shoed, but at the very least he got water here in the creek that you cross. And then he stayed in Russell Tavern. How many of you knew that? Russell Tavern is here in Gettysburg, just north on Carlisle Road, and which was the Newville Road in the 1820s. But there's an intersection there. I think it's a Mennonite church. There's a barbecue place there too on Carlisle Road, just north of Gettysburg. If you turn left just past the barbecue place, that takes you to Russell Tavern. And there's a DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, sign in the front yard saying Washington stayed here. And there's a story too that on the morning that he was leaving to go back to Philadelphia, he and the tavern keeper were standing on the front porch of the tavern. And there was a crowd of people there to see the president. Just like they came for Lincoln, they came to see Washington, you know. So the crowd was trying to listen in on what Washington might say. So Washington leaned over to the tavern keeper, Russell Tavern Keeper's ear, and whispered some nonsense. It was not anything of substance. And the tavern keeper nodded and smiled, and the crowd thought that it was very important information. So anyway, that somehow survived oral history and got written down. But so Washington came through here. All right, one last point to make about Custer, and then we'll head on up and look at that great view, and I'll tell it all in one fell swoop. The fight here started with the signal station at Little Round Top. The signal station at Little Round Top at 1:35 reported that they saw 10,000 Confederates moving from our left to our extreme right. You and I both know, we know the other side. We know that was Longstreet. We know there was that whole rift that was going on with McLaws turning around. And when they turned around to then try to turn around again to get into lower ground along Willoughby Run and not be seen by the signal station, while they were turning around on Hare Ridge, they were spotted by the signal station on Little Round Top. So the signal flag was brought out. It's this large white flag, a little red block in the middle, and you waggle the flag, and over on Cemetery Hill, there was a signal station there, a crudely built wood tower somewhere on the hill. It might have been moved around to different places, but the message was received at Cemetery Hill. Someone would have read the waggle and said with a cipher disc, oh, that's the letter L or the letter H. And the message said, 10,000 of the enemy are moving from our left to our extreme right. That was on July 2nd at 1:35. It's in Volume 27, Part 3 in the correspondences. And then right after that in the time sequence at 2:10 p.m., there's a follow-up message from the same signal station from Little Round Top to Cemetery Hill, and then that message is brought down to General Meade's headquarters. It said they have their ambulances with them. And I wrote something a little while back, and the publisher contacted me, and he said, I don't understand this second message. What's this got to do with anything? That they reported that they saw ambulances. What does that mean? And I said, it means that they plan to fight. They intend for there to be a battle. He said, well, you need to clarify that in the footnote. So in any case, that was Longstreet's corps. And so General Meade went over to his right flank at that point. That's why Sickles moved out undetected by Meade, because Meade was responding to the signal station on Little Round Top. So Meade went over towards Culp's Hill to see if those 10,000 men were going to show up any minute. Then the signal station at Cemetery Hill signaled, and it may have been Stevens Knoll that was involved in the signaling as well, because there's a lesser-known signal station there. But someone, either on Cemetery Hill or Stevens Knoll, had a line of sight all the way out to Brinkerhoff Ridge on the Hanover Road. And they signaled them that the enemy has 10,000. They're moving from our left to our extreme right. Scour the roads north of Gettysburg to see if you can detect the movement of those 10,000 troops that are going to show up on our right. So that led to David Gregg. He got that message. And then Judson Kilpatrick showed up. He commanded 1/3 of the cavalry. He guarded the poles, the south and the north. Buford had guarded the west. Gregg had guarded the east. And the cavalry, 3 cavalry divisions had hermetically sealed the Union roads from every direction to protect them. But Judson Kilpatrick rode from south of the Round Tops along Low Dutch Road. He talked to Gregg on the Hanover Road. Gregg said, I just got a signal message that there's 10,000 unaccounted for Confederates maneuvering north of town. See, the 10,000 Confederates wouldn't have marched through the town because that'd be right below Cemetery Hill and you'd see them. So the most logical place that they would try to move from the Union left to the Union right would be through here. And also just north of here and parallel with here, the Heidlersburg Road. So Kilpatrick talked to Gregg. Gregg passed on that message. Gregg said, I've got the Hanover Road. That's the Battle of Brinkerhoff Ridge. If you've got, and it might have been Kilpatrick's suggestion, but Kilpatrick said, I'll scour that area north of Gettysburg. So Kilpatrick's cavalry came here looking for 10,000 Confederate infantry that the signal station on Little Round Top saw. That's where it's all triggered related to communications. Now, Custer's brigade, Michigan Brigade, 1st, 5th, 6th, and 7th, was already here on the Black Gap Road. They were already picketing and they were skirmishing with Confederates. We know that this was Wade Hampton's Confederates, that it just arrived on July 2nd. The Confederate cavalry, you all know, sort of arrived a day late. And Custer didn't know what he was up against. Kilpatrick showed just along this road, maybe a mile from here, it's actually about a mile and a half from here. It's called the Harman farm, and that's where the skirmishing was going on. The Harman farm's still there. As far as I know, I'm not related to them. And Kilpatrick rode up, found Custer, and he gave him that signal station message and said, can you ascertain, this is in the official reports now, in the official reports, volume 27, this will be part 1, Union reports. In Judson Kilpatrick's report, he said, I told Custer to ascertain whether this cavalry force in front of you is screening a larger infantry force that the signal stations saw earlier and lost sight of. So Custer probably didn't need an excuse to attack. He might have been ready to attack anyway, you know, people like to say. But nevertheless, now he had an official order. Ascertain if that Confederate cavalry in front of you is screening a larger infantry force. So Custer came right through the town square. If you look over there, most of the square is grown in with grass now. Back then, from a nearby copper mine, there were bits and pieces of copper glistening in the town square. That was all gravel there, and I could show you where the copper mine is. We're too far away from it, but it's actually about a mile in that direction. And they called it, the people of Hunterstown called it the streets of gold, because the sun would reflect off all of the little copper bits. So Custer pushes the Confederates. The Confederates cut across. This is the Hunterstown Road now. But the Hunterstown Road, is, Chip just told us, used to cut more of a slant across. So you'd have seen the Confederates falling back, and they were leaving, and they cut across to the top of that ridge, and then you're about to see the Hunterstown Road. It goes south all the way to Gettysburg. It comes out right about where Perkins and Dairy Queen is, McDermott's cement area. And this was Wade Hampton's South Carolinians and Georgians, and in any case, Custer pursued them up to the top of this hill. At that point, he probably knew that they weren't screening a larger infantry force through here. At this point now, it's just becoming a cavalry engagement. It became very clear that he was ascertaining that this was not a screen for a much larger infantry force. All right, now, when we get to the top of the ridge, we're going to be walking. I'm going to try to take us a little bit to the right. That's what I used to do in the old days. And we go around, I'm going to show you this sweeping view and fill in the blanks, okay? And then we'll bring the whole story together. And we want to thank David Keller. David Keller is letting us walk some of his property today. He actually owns that property. And by the way, the original barn that Custer's Michigan Cavalry got in and used for cover and concealment to combat Wade Hampton's cavalry has dismantled. It's owned by John Longacre, and he gave me his text phone number in case anyone wants it. He's willing to deal. And there is a club, a society that supports Custer's history, and they had expressed some interest in it, and none of this has any traction to it. It was just discussions. But they thought, wonder if we can build a museum and incorporate that barn, that key barn. It's known as the J. Felty barn. I'll show you where it was. There's a modern metal barn there now. Okay, so here we go, and let's watch our step and be careful. I'm going to look for the first chance to cut across. Now, this is one of my favorite views in the whole campaign, right here. And you may know that Farnsworth's cavalry also scoured this road and went up towards Heidlersburg, a little bit north of here, and checked it out. And just to make sure that all of these roads that wrap around from the Union left to the Union right, north of town, out of view of the signal station on a little round top, were covered, and make sure that they're clear, and that you can make sure that you clarify there's not 10,000 unaccounted for Confederates moving to your right. And this is so important. All of this, I try to answer the whys and the so whats. It's so important because some of you probably have wondered from time to time, how did Sickles advance out to the orchard and Meade not know about it? It's this story. It's this story. Once the signal station sent him on a wild goose chase and sent Union cavalry up here on a wild goose chase, everything shifted to the Union right, and Sickles moved out essentially unattended. And that's because of the signal station. It all started there. So the Battle of Hunterstown would not have occurred without the signal station on Little Round Top. It's all connected. Now, you may know that Elon Farnsworth's cavalry was down here in this low ground, over here in concealment. So this is the 5th New York, and you're looking at the 18th Pennsylvania Cavalry, 3rd West Virginia Cavalry, and I'm missing one in there somewhere. 1st Vermont, the one I should have said first, Farnsworth's Cavalry. So you have Farnsworth's Cavalry over here, and they were in reserve while Custer actually engaged. Now, Custer had been engaged with advanced pickets at the Harman farm over in the direction of the York Road. But when the Hampton's Confederates just disengaged and they just started riding along the Hunterstown Road that way. And you can catch glimpses of the Hunterstown Road by way of the utility poles there. Where was Wade Hampton going? He was going to Brinkerhoff Ridge to relieve the Stonewall Brigade. You're talking about a couple thousand soldiers there in the Stonewall Brigade so that they could join the attack on Culp's Hill. Pap Green was already outnumbered. He had about 1,500 New Yorkers. I know the 71st Pennsylvania came over to help out, and eventually the 14th Brooklyn was shifted over to help out. But for the most part, there was probably never more than 2,000 Union defenders on Culp's Hill the evening of the 2nd. The Confederates, absent the Stonewall Brigade, attacked with 4,000. So they had a 2-to-1 advantage. That's why John White Geary, later governor of Pennsylvania, who commanded most of the troops, 3 brigades in particular, Candy, Kane, and Green, on Culp's Hill, he never complimented anyone, but in one of his paragraphs in his very dry after-action report, he chose to say the line on Culp's Hill would have never held without Pap Green's field fortifications. Well, that's because they were outnumbered 2-to-1. You throw in the Stonewall Brigade, another 2,000 Confederates in that attack, Baltimore Pike gets overrun. Confederates just go up to the wagon trains. There's 38,000 horses and mules between Gettysburg and just south of Union Mills. You shoot 1 horse for every 6. The other 5 horses in a team of 6 horses won't work in unison with a wounded horse. Now you've stranded 3 or 4 miles, maybe further, wagon trains. Cavalry comes in, sets fire to the wagon trains. It could have been a disaster if Pap Green puts up that tortoiseshell protection of the Baltimore Pike to cover the logistics. And all of that, there's a domino effect. A colleague of mine, Chuck Teague, liked to say, he said, Troy, if you skip one part of the story and just decide, oh, I don't want to know about that, and you delete it, and I don't have time for, he said, you eventually lead to a false conclusion. So if you take out the story of Hunterstown, you don't see the chain reaction. It's that way on our own past. You go back and move one thing, and it's a different outcome somewhere down the line, a chain reaction. So Wade Hampton basically broke contact from Custer because he was trying to relieve the Stonewall Brigade, which was playing cavalry along the Hanover Road at Brinkerhoff Ridge. and to relieve the Stonewall Brigade to join the attack on Culp's Hill. The whole battle could have been completely different with an additional 2,000 Confederates on Culp's Hill that evening. And so as fate would have it, though, Custer entangled him. And what Custer is still trying to do is ascertain why these Confederates are here. I mean, he's lost contact with them since June 30th. And so, I mean, it was at Hanover on June 30th when he last saw them. He's angry that the Confederates have disappeared. The Confederate cavalry has disappeared for 48 hours. So there's a certain ire to his attack. And then he wants to know exactly who they are and what their purpose is. If they're not screening 10,000 troops, where do they come from, and where have they been, and where are they headed? So he wisely decides to continue ascertaining. He posted on this side of the road, from the road out here, he posted the 5th Michigan, and excuse me, the 6th Michigan, and then behind them the 5th Michigan. The 5th Michigan would have been behind a skirt of trees here. The trees weren't as thick. They were probably half this height. Cattle constantly would have grazed in the woods and removed the vegetation on the floor. Trees were constantly being cut down to use for firewood, to cook, and to keep your house warm, and mending fences and barns. So the trees were here. They appear on all the maps, but they were only about half this high. They were newer growth trees. And so the 5th Michigan would have been in reserve behind the trees. The 6th Michigan would have been visible here. On the other side of the road, visible would have been the 7th Michigan, just extending the line, forming a T with the Hunterstown Road. So all these light blue trousers and dark blue coats and yellow piping on their dark blue coats indicating cavalry and spurs. So you can see this, a lot of horses here. And in the creek where that Chip and the Langman's own, it's no doubt that was being used for water. Okay, it was being in the Rock Creek starts here and heads south. So you've got Rock Creek and you've got the tributary that flows in across Chip's property. So they would have needed that water. Horse drinks 10 to 15 gallons of water a day. So that's very important. Now, the 1st Michigan was kept in reserve. That was Custer's Old First. He always brought them out when there was a real emergency. Remember, he called the Old First forward in the final counterattack at East Cavalry Field the next day. So the Old First was in reserve behind this skirt of trees on the Langman's property. Now, what Custer did was something that goes all the way back to the Magyar days in the Middle Ages, when cavalry was used back then, and the Mongols did this too. What they would do is you send a small force out and attack, and you attack hard and rudely, and that causes your enemy to counterattack, and you draw them into a mousetrap. So that's what Custer was going to try to do. Now, he took Company A of the 6th Michigan Cavalry. A company is only 30 or 40 mounted cavalry, and put them in the road. There's no fences there now, but there were post and rail fences on either side of the road. So put 2 and 2 together here. Why would he only put no more than 40 cavalry? I mean, he's got 2 regiments here. He's probably got 700 to 800 cavalry here in front, and then at least that many in reserve, and then he's got Farnsworth over here. So why is he only putting no more than 40 cavalry in the road to make the attack? That seems like a real undersize for this many troops to only attack with about 40. The road is really narrow. Yeah, think of a bowling alley, and you've got gutters on either side, and you roll the ball, and if you make a mistake, it ends up in the gutter before it gets to the pins. All right, think of both sides of the road with post and rail fences as something that would hem in the cavalry. So you can only use limited numbers. If you put, let's say you decided you were going to take half your force, and that would be, let's say, 700 cavalry, and put them in the road. Basically what you're doing is you're funneling them into a disaster. They can't move. If something happens with the lead horse and he gets shot or killed, then everyone's just stuck. You got to have room to turn around and come back. So you want to go out, hit them in the nose, get them mad, however many there are, get the Confederates to show what they're up to. They're going to turn and come back. So you only need a small force to do that, and you're bouncing off the fences if you're more than 3 wide. 3 horses wide. So it's the most narrow of all racing tracks, if you will. So all of a sudden you just see at a full gait, you see 40, no more than 40 Union cavalry racing in that direction, led by Custer. And it's been said that Custer would often dress like a clown. He had, and we mean this respectfully, he had a red bow and blonde curly hair. Jeb Stuart dressed like a clown too. He had feathers in his hats and all kinds of colorful scarves. Why did cavalry chieftains dress like clowns? On purpose. To be seen on a smoke-covered field. And here's another thing that's important too. And I thank Andy Custer for this. She taught me this years ago. She said, Troy, cavalry always turns left when they fall back. She said it's sort of like a stock car race. They're going around counterclockwise. If you had some of the cars going clockwise and other going counterclockwise, that could be a real disaster. You can't hear once the fighting starts. So the default is we're always going to turn left when we retreat. And of course it was going to be a retreat by design, hoping the Confederates would follow them into a trap. And I'm going to describe the trap here. We're winding down now, but wanted to set the stage here for you. So you basically have this crowding of horses if the first 2 or 3 are shot. And then you could, if everyone's on a narrow funnel, the Confederates can just shoot 1 horse at a time. There's no way for them to fan out. It could be very disastrous. So you can see them in your mind's eye now. Custer's leading them with the red ribbon, the blonde curly locks, the blue coat, and it's just a race. And then we can see a car going timed sort of with our story, probably moving at about that speed. And right about where you see the car that just came over the ridge, that's where they run into the Confederates, at the Gilbert farm. And you can see the brick Gilbert farm. My neighbor's children own that house. And he loves Hunterstown. He used to walk across the street and talk to me. He passed away recently, but he loves the Battle of Hunterstown. Well, that's where Hampton's Georgians and South Carolinians were. The Georgians were under Cobb's Legion. You maybe remember in the old days hearing about Gone with the Wind, and I'm trying to remember the main character's name is not Longstreet or Longfellow, but Ashley Longworth. Do you remember him? He was in Cobb's Legion. All right, now of course that's fiction, but he was in Cobb's Legion. It's the same, it's a fictional story, but this is Cobb's Legion. And they attack Custer and they surround him. Something happens to his horse and he's dehorsed. Some of the Georgians come around him and they're getting up close and they have sabers, and he's going to be badly wounded if not killed. All of a sudden, alongside of him comes Norvell Churchill on a horse with the 6th Michigan Cavalry, Company A, and whisks him up on the back of his horse and gets him away. And Custer escapes. A near-death experience. I had a professor that liked to say, Troy, you need to know a little of the road not taken to better understand the road that was taken. You know, we don't go out in the realm of fiction, but we do need to go back to the moment of uncertainty where something could have gone differently. And you need to know just a little of that, so because the participant didn't have the certainty that we have, the certain knowledge of the outcome. So we go back and add some of the anxiety of the moment. If he doesn't survive this, Little Bighorn doesn't occur. There's a lot of different things that don't occur. That's what's fascinating about studying history, is all the and you can't live there. You have to go on with what actually happened. But at the time, that was a critical moment. So I spoke once, I wrote an article on Custer for Custer Book 5. Every 5 years, there's a new book published. I think they're up to Custer Book 8 or 9 now. And there's something like 16 articles, and mine was one of them. I wrote on the Battle of Hunterstown, and they invited me to speak in Monroe, Michigan. I got to fly into Detroit and then go there and speak, and I got to meet Norvell Churchill's great-great-granddaughter. And she was in a wheelchair, and she came up and shook my hand. And they loved this story, the story that I'm telling. Then the curator took me on a one-time exhibit that was going on in the museum, and he said, I really want you to see something. First of all, they had some of the original tombstones from Little Bighorn. Did you know the ones that are on display there now are replacements? The originals are in Monroe. So he wanted me to see that, and then he said, I want you to see the flag that Custer's Michigan Brigade carried at Gettysburg. He said, we don't own it, but we got this exhibit, and it was maroon. It was a maroon, as I remember, it looked silk, and it had gold letters sewn on from multiple battles that would be stitched on, so it's gold on maroon, sort of like the Washington Commanders colors, Bob. And so there was all these, I remember seeing Trevelyan Station, all the different things that Custer's Michigan Brigade fought in. And the curator said, do you see anything unusual? I didn't see anything unusual. He said, do you see Gettysburg anywhere on the flag? I said, no. He said, do you see anything comparable to Gettysburg? And then I started to notice, and he smiled, Hunterstown was there, not East Cavalry Field. By the way, you know East Cavalry Field is a post-battle term. No one uttered the term East Cavalry Field during the battle. That's a term from the Middle Ages related to, there's an east field and a west field. One's fallow, one you grow crops. And Batchelder coined that term. During the battle, it would have probably been called the Battle of Golden Station, because there was a railroad train stop there. And they were guarding the rail lines that were being repaired in New Oxford behind the lines to try to bring up supply. Eventually, that rail line brought Lincoln to the battlefield 4 months later. That was being repaired by the Railroad Construction Corps, and Union Cavalry was out there where that train station was. So if you went up to a Union Cavalry participant from the third day of the battle 20 years later and said, you fought at East Cavalry Field, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. It actually just really throws us off in terms of why that area is important. But so Custer would have never had stitched East Cavalry Field, because the term didn't exist. But he has Hunterstown. And what they wanted me to know was that Custer never forgot that he almost died here. Okay, so, and the Churchills, their descendants, are very proud of the fact that they saved him. Now, as Custer, he punched them in the nose. He bloodied their nose. He got their ire up and entangled them so that they couldn't go to Brinkerhoff Ridge and relieve the Stonewall Brigade, or wherever. He didn't know where they were going, but wherever they were going, he stopped them. And the Confederates put similar numbers in the middle of the road. Not too many, because it's a real narrow passage. Horses are bouncing against the fences. And at a full gait, I want you to imagine beige and gray uniforms on a horse chasing Custer back. And then the set mousetrap was let loose at that point. Where you see these modern red barns, there was a 2-story Pennsylvania Bank barn. It was red. And I remember when it was there, and I did a tour down there once, and some members of the 6th Michigan reenactors climbed up there, and they got it on film many years ago on PCN. But right where that barn was, the 6th Michigan was in the barn. And they waited for the Confederates to get within small arms range, and they just started shooting down on them from the barn. At the same time, on the other side of the road, the 7th Michigan was hiding in the tall grass in the fields and whatever crops were there. And they rose up like a jack-in-the-box and fired on the Confederates from the other side. It was just all at once, there was a crossfire. Custer had drawn some part of Hampton's brigade into a crossfire. And then Elder's guns were right here. There would be 12 yards between guns, because you'd have several people operating the guns. And it was almost like a pit box at a race car place. You need room to maneuver, to load and fire, sponge. So this whole ridge up to here would have been covered with those guns fired canister right into the horses. Now, there were 80 soldiers killed or wounded in this fight. And I remember Paul Shevchuk telling me years ago, the curator I mentioned earlier, he told me, he said, for the amount of time that they fought, roughly 2 hours, and then this action was maybe an hour here in this road, those are really high casualties, and particularly for cavalry. Infantry would sometimes chide the cavalry for avoiding fights. This was an intense fight. So the two sides then separated, and where you see the Gilbert farm, that's where Hillary P. Jones's artillery was brought up from. You know where the Gettysburg High School is on Hylersburg Road. That's where those guns were brought from right across where the high school is now. And the Park Service has a little cul-de-sac you can drive in and still see the guns. Green's battery of Hillary P. Jones's brigade. A battery in the Confederate artillery brigade would be just 4 guns. A battery was 4 guns. So those guns fired and the overshots landed on the Langman's property. And Elder was firing back. And my memory here is a little sketchy. I'd have to go back and look at my notes. But as I remember, Pennington came up on the other side of the road eventually too. Pennington's battery. At the very least, Elder was here. And for the rest of the evening, the fighting probably broke out around 4 p.m. It was over by 5 p.m. There was counter battery fire all the way till dark, which was about 7:15. Then under the cover of darkness, just to complete the story, under the cover of darkness, you may know Kilpatrick, Farnsworth, Gregg left this part of the battlefield, that is from Hunterstown to Brinkerhoff Ridge. And where did they go? Occasionally somebody knows. They went all the way to 2 taverns. You think they just left the whole field. They were protecting the Union right. You'd think some of them would have gone to protect the Union left at the Round Tops. No, all of them went to 2 taverns. They went there because there's a water source there. It's also important it's the Baltimore Pike, because you want to cover that main artery. At 2 taverns, too, there's a crossroad that connects with the little town of Barlow to the west, and to the east, it connects with Bonneville. So it's a really important crossroad there. It's where the 12th Corps stopped on the first day to stop and water and go in. Slocum went into 2 taverns and had a meal. More than once, that becomes an important staging area during the battle. Some of you like these finer details. So why did the cavalry go there? Because at the Council of War, we're trying to connect everything so you can see how Hunterstown is connected. At the Council of War that night from 7 to 11 p.m., where several of you work, one of the people that spoke up that scared everyone was John Newton. He had been just shifted from the 6th Corps to be given command of the 1st Corps. After Reynolds' death, and then Doubleday allegedly didn't perform as well, and so he was taken back down from 1st Corps command to division command, and Meade moved Newton over from the 6th Corps to command the 1st Corps. All right, that same John Newton was considered one of the best engineers, right up there with Gouverneur Warren. And Meade thought so highly of him, he let him speak. Not only to give him on-the-job experience his first day as a Corps commander, but also because he was known and valued as an engineer. And when he spoke, you know, you all know Colonel George Sharp spoke from the Bureau of Military Intelligence and talked about where they had seen Pickett, and that Pickett was only 4 miles from the battlefield. They had reports that he had just arrived, and it was really valuable information. Well, Humphreys, what he said was, not Humphreys, but what John Newton said was, he said, the Confederates attacked so hard against the Union left on the 2nd day. You know, the wheat field, peach orchard, that area, Round Top. He said, during the night, don't be surprised if they don't maneuver around that flank. And the worry was, remember, the War Department, through Henry Halleck, Lincoln, had telegraphed all the way up to Indian Lookout Mountain, Dave, where you work at Mount St. Mary's, and then that message was carried up. That message was carried to Gettysburg, and the message from the White House essentially was, do not let the enemy get around your flank. You all read that before. So John Newton just amplified that during the night, the Confederates are likely to try to turn the flank. You have to watch it. Dark, anything can happen in the dark. So the 4th Pennsylvania Cavalry was sent south of the Round Tops to look for any attempt by the Confederates to try to flank that night. And both divisions of Union cavalry still present at Gettysburg, that's Gregg and Kilpatrick, left the Union right, Hunterstown, Brinkerhoff Ridge, and went to 2 taverns. That would be the obvious cut across from the Taneytown Road through the town of Barlow to 2 taverns. That would be the logical cut across right there. That would be the logical flanking point. So 2 divisions of cavalry. Buford, by this point, was in Taneytown at the end of July 2nd, and then he went to Westminster to guard all the railroad supplies there. There's 4,000 tons of medical and food supplies at Westminster, 24 miles south of Gettysburg on the Baltimore Pike. So the 4th Pennsylvania Cavalry discovered Confederates were scouting that night, looking to try to turn the flank. Remember, Longstreet wanted to turn the Union left flank. And he actually gave the order, and then Lee had him countermand the order. McLaws' division was to go first, and then picket was to be used. Longstreet wanted to maneuver behind the Round Tops, attack it from reverse while attacking it frontally, and pull that Round Top metaphoric stake out of the ground, roll the Union line up to Cemetery Hill. And then later on in post-war years, he rhapsodized about he would have wanted to make a broader turning maneuver all the way well south of Meade's line at Gettysburg. Cut off the Union troops here at Gettysburg from their supplies at Westminster, more importantly, Washington and beyond. That would cause the Union to attack them on ground of their choosing. You've heard this many times, on defensive ground. Well, Longstreet was out scouting a tactical maneuver and thinking about a broader strategic maneuver around the Union left flank. The 4th Pennsylvania discovered that. Kilpatrick the next morning went over to cover the Union left. You all know that he came up between Warfield Ridge and Bushman Hill and guarded the left. Even as Gregg rode back out with Custer to the Hanover Road, and that would be the East Cavalry fight. Now, to tie it all together, we have to answer the whys and the so whats. Why was Custer, first of all, sent to the right? He should have been with Kilpatrick to the left. He should have been with Kilpatrick on the Union left at the Round Tops, because he belonged to Kilpatrick. What was he doing with Gregg out there? It's because the 4th Pennsylvania Cavalry had discovered enough to know, they had discovered enough to give Kilpatrick an understanding that he could spare Custer to go with Gregg. He would only need to keep 2 brigades to protect the left. He also had Wesley Merritt coming up from Emmitsburg Road to protect his left. All right, now, another important answer to the why question here, as we tie this all together, is why did the cavalry battle occur at East Cavalry Field, which is right over there? Why did it occur over there on July 3rd, the next day after the Battle of Hunterstown? Because of the Battle of Hunterstown. When the Confederates, when the sun came up around 4:15 a.m. on July 3rd, the Confederates still thought, the Confederates there at the Gilbert Farm still thought Union cavalry was here under Judson Kilpatrick. Thought they were still here. And so they were real timid. As you see the car crawling along from your right to left, the Confederate cavalry under Wade Hampton started riding in this direction. They stopped to bury their dead. It became very clear that Judson Kilpatrick had vanished during the night. They didn't know he went to 2 taverns. He just wasn't here. So what did Wade Hampton do? Wade Hampton went up to the Langman's house, turned, cut across their property, out to the Harman farm where the skirmishing had been started the day before, out to the York Road where Hartlaub's furniture is, and not far from the homeless shelter in that area. Accessed York Road from there, went to where Harley Davidson is now, and accessed the cut-across road to what would be called East Cavalry Field. And what were they doing? What were the Confederate cavalry troopers doing? They were trying to flank Hunterstown. They were trying to flank. Union cavalry had last been seen here. They had had no success here. They had to fill the vacuum with the Union cavalry that had withdrawn and try to find them, locate them. But at the same time, the Confederates maneuvered further east so that they would have a chance to come around on the Baltimore Pike, or at least threaten the Union supply trains enough to draw Union cavalry out there. The point is that if the Hunterstown fight had never occurred, there wouldn't have been an East Cavalry Field. The Confederates just bumped out further east because they had no success here. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if you take this piece out of the story, there's so many things that are out of place. If we were to, we're not going to do this obviously, but if we were to walk down to where the old barn sits, used to sit, and if you look out in that direction, you can see the green water tower at Cress's Ridge at East Cavalry Field. It's that, we're that close to it. So why does the fight occur at East Cavalry Field? It's an attempt by the Confederates to move wider east to get around Union cavalry still believed to be in this area. So yeah, so the two go hand in hand. You can't really understand East Cavalry Field unless you understand its predecessor here, Hunterstown, the day before. So Hunterstown then is sometimes called North Cavalry Field. You know, there's a South Cavalry Field, there's an East Cavalry Field. We sometimes call Fairfield West Cavalry Field because there was a cavalry battle at Fairfield on July 3rd. The cavalry action is always way out here on the periphery because they can move so much quicker than infantry can. So anyway, did we have any questions before we head back for our meal? I probably took longer than my allotted time, but yes, Bob.
Does that, the fact that Jeb fired in all four directions, does that maybe they're thinking they're here, he's trying to find them, right?
That's a great point. Bob's thinking ahead and he's looking for other clues. You all know that Confederate battery on July 3rd at East Cavalry Field fired in 4 directions of the compass. And why would they do that? It was called acoustic shadow. Sound out of an artillery piece, you've heard me say this, Bob, but sound out of an artillery piece will refract up, get caught between the ionosphere, stratosphere, carry for a while, and then for unknown reasons just refract back down. Daniel, you and I, we've been at our house at Biglerville, and we've heard battle sounds. We walk out in our yard, you can hear rumbling, we think, oh, they're firing ordnance at Fort Indiantown Gap. That's an hour and 15 minutes away and you can hear that. Well, sometimes sound will travel up, get trapped between 2 spheres, carry for 20, 30 miles. Like in Baltimore, Maryland, they thought they were hearing a thunderstorm and they were hearing the battle 60 miles away. But sound also goes down. And when it travels along the ground, it sounds like this in all wars. Veterans will tell you that it sounds like woo, 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 woo. So that's the sound of artillery on the ground there. But to your point, why would you fire 4 directions of the compass? I mean, you got right to the point. They're trying to locate where did the Union cavalry go during the night under cover of darkness, and they're trying to find them. So by firing 4 directions of the compass, you're hoping to draw somebody out to reveal what's in front of you. And yeah, excellent point there. And you're also dealing with acoustic shadow. If you fire in 4 directions, some of you acoustic people know sound will travel further in one direction than it will another. Sometimes it'll hit a tree lot like this and stop, and in another direction it might go on. One direction might go 1 mile, another direction 5 or 10 miles. So that's all part of it. Thank you all so much. Okay. That was my last tour, but my last unofficial tour. So okay. So here we go. Let's head on back, and I hear Chip has some main dishes that are to die for. Pick up Eric Wittenberg's excellent book on lesser-known cavalry engagements. He does an excellent job with this. Harry Fiennes' book on Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill also has a whole chapter.